Photography has been an integral part of society for longer than people know. At its conception, humankind did not realize how much this would alter the perception of history, humanity, art, and culture. Photographs are used for so many different purposes, it's hard to peg down a single effect it has had on culture. From examining the human condition, documenting history, sharing art, to inspiring others, photography has changed many facets of culture. Now it's time to step into history and see the world for what it truly was over 2 centuries ago. The lifespan of a photograph has changed as photography has advanced, so many of the first actual photographs may not be around today. While paintings and literature may give us a view of history through a prejudiced eye, photography gives a much more bare and honest view of history. Following are the oldest photographs known in existence. The first camera, Obscura's fascinating evolution. It's important to note that the first camera was actually not a camera as we know it today. Camera obscura means dark room in Latin. Sometimes historians will also refer to this as a pinhole image. And it's easy to see why this is a simplified term for it. The camera obscura lets light in through a small opening on one side, and projects a reversed and inverted image on the other. Oftentimes, this was performed in dark rooms, as its Latin name would suggest. The surroundings had to be dark in order for the image to be clear enough. This inverted image method is very similar to how the human eye works. This camera obscura theory can be traced back to the studies of Chinese philosopher and the founder of Mohism Mozi. Mozi wrote that the image in a camera obscura is flipped upside down because light travels in straight lines from its source. More great minds would later build upon this by noting again how the relationship between sunlight and gaps in the leaves would project an image of the eclipsed sun onto the ground. The great mind behind this observation? The one and only Aristotle in the 4th century. This whole theory kept evolving and building until during the 9th century, Arab philosopher, mathematician, physician, and musician Al-Kindi experimented with light and a pinhole. Camera obscura's glorious debut. There is a reason Leonardo da Vinci is lauded as one of the world's greatest minds. The foundation of all of this work on camera obscura fueled da Vinci's work in the Codex Atlanticus, 1502. This was the first published and clear description of the theory. He published this along with many of his other famous inventions and illustrations. Over the years, da Vinci drew around 270 diagrams of camera obscura devices in his sketchbooks. With the buzz surrounding camera obscura through the centuries, many historians have speculated on who took advantage of some of the methods. Many art historians pose that Johannes Vermeer, the famous Dutch Baroque period painter, utilized this in some of his work. The theory is based on studies of the artworks themselves. Beneath the surface of his paintings, there are no signs that he made any corrections to his layouts as he worked. Instead, Vermeer created a shadowy image outlining the scene before painting, perhaps based on a projected image. Of course, this in no way would diminish his clear artistic prowess, but it's interesting to see this theory brought into the art history sphere. First photograph on a camera. So how do we jump from projecting images onto surfaces to making a photograph? That is, the long-lasting effect of the camera obscura theory. There were attempts made throughout history, but it wasn't until around 1800 that progress was made on this front. Around 1800, Thomas Wedgwood made the first reliably documented, although unsuccessful, attempt at capturing camera images in permanent form. His experiments did produce detailed photograms, but he and his partner were unable to fix them to last. In the mid-1820s, Nicéphore Niepce first managed to fix an image that was captured with a camera, but at least 8 hours or even several days of exposure in the camera were required, and the earliest results were very crude. However, this is the image he took. It is of Niepce's estate in Saint-Luc de Varennes, France. To take the world's first photograph, Niepce used bitumen of Judea, a substance used since the time of the ancient Egyptians, mixed with water, and put it onto a pewter plate, which he then heated, already hardening the substance onto the plate to some degree. He then put the plate in a camera and pointed it out a second-story window. He left the camera alone for a long period of time, perhaps as long as 2 days. The bitumen then hardened onto the plate, less so in the places that received less sunlight. First reliably dated daguerreotype. Of course, the process that Nicéphore Niepce wasn't perfect, but his associate that he worked closely with worked hard to perfect the methods they started. Louis Daguerre worked closely with his partner, and they worked tirelessly to truly modernize their approach. However, Niepce died in 1833, before the technique was fully developed. Nonetheless, Daguerre pressed on with the help of Niepce's son, Isidore Niepce, eventually finding that a silver iodide plate exposed to mercury fumes could produce a photo within minutes. A photographic process historian at the George Eastman Museum, Mark Osterman, stated, Daguerre discovered that the silver iodide plate required only a fraction of the exposure time and that an invisible, or latent image, could be revealed by exposing the plate to mercury fumes, but it didn't end there. The plate could then be placed in a mixture of sodium chloride that stabilized the image. Finally, success. By 1838, Daguerre was taking photos of objects and buildings with ease. In 1839, the French government awarded Daguerre and Isidore Niepce lifetime pensions in exchange for sharing their photography technique. The use of daguerreotype photography spread quickly around the world, leading to other inventors wanting to mold the technique into something more. Oldest photograph with a human in it. Once again, our old pal, Louis Daguerre, comes through with a photographic first, and this is when photography finally captured what seemed impossible, human life. As seen in the photograph, it may just be a mundane day, with the small figures in the left-hand corner just living their daily lives. But little did they know, they would become the first humans to be in a successful photograph. The photograph was taken from a window in Daguerre's studio, beside the diorama de Louis Daguerre at 5 Rue des Marais, behind the Place du Château d'Eau. An interesting fact about this photograph is that the street shown below would normally be crowded with pedestrians, vendors, and other people living their lives. However, because the method had an exposure time of 10 minutes, the only people captured here were the ones who kept still for that long. So this is actually a sort of eerie photo if you think about it. So many people were there. Only 2 were captured in the oldest image of humans. First self-portrait photograph. Daguerre's methods inspired countless people to take up this new and amazing hobby. The oldest self-portrait known is of Robert Cornelius. When Daguerre announced his invention of a photographic method to the French Academy of Sciences in August 1839, the news spread like wildfire. That October, a young Philadelphian, Robert Cornelius, working out of doors to take advantage of the light, made this head and shoulders self-portrait, using a box fitted with a lens from an opera glass. Cornelius was an amateur chemist and photography enthusiast from Philadelphia, but on that day in October, he decided to make history. He set up his camera at the back of the family store in Philadelphia. Cornelius took the image by removing the lens cap and then running into frame, where he sat for a minute before covering up the lens again. On the back of the image he wrote, "The first light picture ever taken, 1839. Oldest surviving photograph of a woman, with her eyes open. Once again, our old pal, Louis Daguerre, comes through with a photographic first, and this is when photography finally captured what seemed impossible, human life. As seen in the photograph, it may just be a mundane day, with the small figures in the left-hand corner just living their daily lives. But little did they know, they would become the first humans to be in a successful photograph. The photograph was taken from a window in Daguerre's studio beside the diorama de Louis Daguerre at 5 Rue des Marais, behind the Place du Château d'Eau. An interesting fact about this photograph is that the street shown below would normally be crowded with pedestrians, vendors, and other people living their lives. However, because the method had an exposure time of 10 minutes, the only people captured here were the ones who kept still for that long. So this is actually a sort of eerie photo if you think about it. So many people were there. Only 2 were captured in the oldest image of humans. First photograph of the moon. Once again, nobody get in the way of John William Draper and his determination to make history. Not only was he the first to photograph a woman with her eyes open, but he is the first to successfully photograph the moon in 1840. Did we mention that Draper was also a professor at NYU? Not only that, but Draper's portfolio was full of amazing feats. Given his interest in medicine, chemistry, and evolution, it is surprising that Draper is best known today for a book on quite a different subject, published in 1874. It was called A History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science, where he tried to make the case that, throughout history, science has tried to expand our horizons, and the church has tried to confine them, that science and religion have always been at war. Additionally, Draper was a co-discoverer of the first basic law of photochemistry, called the Grotius-Draper law. It says that light must be absorbed by a system to bring about photochemical change. He also gave us the so-called Draper point. He realized that any object, regardless of material, glows dull red at 977 of. That was important in the evolution of quantum mechanics. Of course, pictured above is another one of his great feats, The first image of the moon. Daguerreotypes do not have a long shelf life unless they are carefully preserved from the moment they are taken, so the lunar image has suffered in the last 180 years, but it is still there a significant astrophotographic first. First hoax photograph or deep social analysis. Do not fret. The man in this photo is still alive or was when it was taken, but many are unsure of his intention here. Many have awarded him the spot of first hoax photograph. But the man in the image, Hippolyte Bayard, may have had a deeper meaning than just posing as though he had just passed. In this photograph, Bayard presents himself as a victim who ended his own life by drowning, provoked by the failure of the French authorities to recognize his own discovery of the photographic process as equal to Daguerre's pioneering work. According to one account, earlier in 1839, Bayard put together what is considered by some to be the first ever photographic exhibition in an auction room in Paris. This historical context suggests that the self-portrait can be read as a crossroads at which issues of recognition, authorship, display, visibility, invisibility, truth and illusion meet and play off of one another. You can read more about this fascinating misunderstanding of historical context in The Impossible Photograph, Hippolyte Bayard's self-portrait as a drowned man. Oldest photograph of a U.S. president. John Quincy Adams, son of John and Abigail Adams, served as the sixth President of the United States from 1825 to 1829, a member of multiple political parties over the years. He also served as a diplomat, a senator, and a member of the House of Representatives. This image of John Quincy Adams is the earliest known photo of a U.S. president to still exist and was taken in March 1843 when he was 75 years old and serving as a representative of Massachusetts' 8th Congressional District, 14 years after the end of his presidency. There are multiple arguments for which photograph is the oldest, but the general consensus agrees that John Quincy Adams was, in fact, the subject of the oldest photograph of a U.S. president, but it is generally accepted that the one above is the original first photo of the president. Dating from 1843, the photograph of President John Quincy Adams is a unique daguerreotype and was produced by artist Philip Hawes just 4 years after Louis Daguerre's radical invention was revealed to the world. Oldest photograph of people drinking. We see the method of photos begin to shift some throughout the mid-1800s. Halotype, also called Talbotype, was an early photographic technique invented by William Henry Fox Talbot of Great Britain in the 1830s. In this technique, a sheet of paper coated with silver chloride was exposed to light in a camera obscura. Those areas hit by light became dark in tone, yielding a negative image. The revolutionary aspect of the process lay in Talbot's discovery of a chemical, gallic acid, that could be used to develop the image on the papera, accelerate the silver chloride's chemical reaction to the light it had been exposed to. In this image, you can see friends enjoying a cold one and posing for this calotype image. The Metropolitan Museum of Art describes it perfectly. A timeless ritual, a jovial meeting over beers is perfectly rendered by the photographic team of D.O. Hill and Robert Adamson. In the seemingly impromptu snapshot, a mirthful Hill has just risen from the table to stand by George Bell, the surgeon turned social reformer, who almost manages to keep his cool. The writer and renowned stained glass artist, James Ballantyne, in an attempt at seriousness clutches a book, but struggles to suppress a laugh, while Adamson, operating the camera, remains outside the frame. It is still heartwarming to see the oldest photo of people just enjoying each other's company. First photograph of the sun. It's hard to believe that after photographs became more common, that people were so quickly able to apply the new technology to capturing advanced images. The first photo of the sun was made by French physicists Hippolyte Fizeau and Laurent Foucault. They, like many others of this time, used a daguerreotype. More than 160 years ago, their seemingly simple black and white photo was remarkable for depicting our sun not as an overwhelming, ungraspable celestial body, but as another star in the sky. Our star in the sky. And something even more surprising, you can even see the sunspots. Sunspots are caused by disturbances in the sun's magnetic field welling up to the photosphere, the sun's visible surface. The powerful magnetic fields in the vicinity of sunspots produce active regions on the sun, which in turn frequently spawn disturbances such as solar flares and coronal mass ejections, CMEs. However, even though this is the first time it was captured on photograph, doesn't mean people hadn't known about them. The sunspots were discovered in the early 1600s. Oldest photograph of New York City. We know New York City as the hustling, bustling hub of economy, business and fashion, but that wasn't always the case. As the oldest photo of NYC depicts, it was more like the Old West than the urban supercenter we recognize today. We're not sure of who took this photograph, but it was taken in 1848 of the Upper West Side, known as Manhattan today. While this image shows a quaint and quiet rural life, New York City grew quickly. New York, with a population of 96,000 in 1810, surged far beyond its rivals, reaching a population of 1,080,000 in 1860, compared to 566,000 in Philadelphia, 212,000 in Baltimore, and 178,000 in Boston. But the Big Apple had its fair share of struggles during this time. From cholera outbreaks to fires, the growth and vitalization of the iconic city was hard-won. Oldest known picture of a Native American village. The Cheyenne were North American Plains Indians who spoke an Algonquian language and inhabited the regions around the Platte and Arkansas rivers during the 19th century. Before 1700, the Cheyenne lived in what is now central Minnesota, where they farmed, hunted, gathered wild rice, and made pottery. They later occupied a village of earth lodges on the Cheyenne River in North Dakota. It was probably during this period that they acquired horses and became more dependent on the buffalo for food. This particular image was taken from anywhere between 1853 to 1860. The exact date is unclear, but it was taken by early American photographer Matthew B. Brady. He is best known for his depictions for the American Civil War. As more and more white settlers pushed west in the 1850s, the Cheyenne, along with their new allies, began to rebel against the pioneers, as well as the U.S. Army. When gold was discovered in Colorado, the 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie was broken, and the territory that had been ceded to them was taken away. This is the oldest known photo of a Native American village. Oldest aerial photograph. This is actually not the first aerial photograph. Photographer Nadar shot the first aerial photo, but it was lost. Therefore, this photo by James Wallace Black is considered to be the first aerial photograph. The photograph was taken over the iconic American city of Boston, Massachusetts. Many historic things happened in the hallowed city of Boston, and it landed another by taking its history to the sky. Once again, the Metropolitan Museum of Art describes it best known for his photographs of Boston. After the devastating fire of 1872, Black launched his solo career in 1860, with the production of a series of aerial photographs taken from Samuel King's hot air balloon The Queen of the Air. Black's photographs caught the attention of Oliver Wendell Holmes, a poet and professor of medicine at Harvard, who gave this photograph its title. In July 1863, Holmes wrote in the Atlantic Monthly, Boston, as the eagle and wild goose see it, is a very different object from the same place, as the solid citizen looks up at its eaves and chimneys. First color photograph. While the magic of photography ignited a sense of wonder in people around the world, there was one key component missing from the images: color. Most of us don't see the world in black and white. So there was always the issue of not capturing the true essence of people, places, and objects in an image. However, this changed in 1861. While Sir Isaac Newton pioneered the scientific understanding of color and light, it would be many years before this could be captured in photographs. Nearly 200 years later, in 1861, a young Scottish physicist, James Clerk Maxwell, conducted an experiment to show that, in fact, all colors can be made by an appropriate mixture of red, green, and blue light. Many media enthusiasts may now know this to be the RGB spectrum. According to the Science Media Museum, Maxwell took 3 separate lantern slides of a tartan ribbon through red, green, and blue filters. These slides were then projected through the same filters using 3 separate magic lanterns. When the 3 images were carefully superimposed on the screen, they combined to make a colored image which was a recognizable reproduction of the original. While Maxwell's experiments demonstrated clearly the basic principles of color photography in practice, his demonstration should not have worked at all. Although the physicist didn't know it, the photographic emulsions that he used were insensitive to red light. Fortunately for Maxwell, the red cloth in the ribbon reflected ultraviolet light. This was invisible to the eye but did register on the emulsion. Oldest colored landscape photograph. While the fundamental theory of color photography may have been understood, a practical method of color photography had not been achieved. Some experimenters pursued the idea of a direct method of color reproduction, which did not rely on mixing primary colors. In 1891, Gabriel Lippmann, a professor of physics at the Sorbonne, demonstrated a color process which was based on the phenomenon of light interference. the interaction of light waves that produces the brilliant colors seen in soap bubbles. This process won Lippmann a Nobel Prize in 1908, and was marketed commercially for a short time around the turn of the century. In this photograph of the French countryside in 1877, we can see the more rudimentary methods of color photography used. Photographer, Louis Arthur Ducos du Horon, was a pioneer in color photography, and was the mastermind behind the process that created this photo. After writing an unpublished paper setting forth his basic concepts in 1862, he worked on developing practical processes for color photography on the three-color principle. Using both additive and subtractive methods in 1868 he patented his ideas, and in 1869 he published them in Les couleurs en photographie, Solution du problème. The discovery of dye sensitization by Hermann Wilhelm Vogel in 1873 greatly facilitated the initial three-color analysis on which all of Ducos du Horon's methods depended. First high-speed photographic series. The Horse in Motion is a well-known and groundbreaking series of images. It is a series of cabinet cards by Edward Muybridge, including 6 cards that each show a sequential series of 6 to 12 automatic electrophotographs depicting the movement of a horse. Muybridge shot the photographs in June 1878. An additional card reprinted the single image of the horse Occident trotting at high speed, which had previously been published by Muybridge in 1877. The series became the first example of chronophotography, an early method to photographically record the passing of time, mainly used to document the different phases of locomotion for scientific study. It formed an important step in the development of motion pictures. To actually view this photograph the way it was meant to be viewed, you can find it on YouTube. First photograph of lightning. As we know well from learning about early photography, exposure times were extremely long. If somebody blinked or moved, it could greatly change the quality of the image. However, this scientific and photographic feat changed everything. William Jennings was a Philadelphia photographer who experimented with color photography and artificial lightning. But he accomplished what many could not, catching lightning on camera. It's amazing to see the oldest image of lightning. Lightning happens when the negative charges, electrons, in the bottom of the cloud are attracted to the positive charges, protons, in the ground. Before 1882, lightning had never successfully been captured. Jennings made some significant modifications to its structure which enabled him to photograph lightning. Jennings' addition of a yellow color filter to his camera, along with the development of the hot air balloon, made it possible for the adventurous photographer to snap sharp images of lightning. He was recognized for this achievement by receiving the Wetherill Medal in the 1930s. First photograph of a tornado. I don't suppose anybody is too shocked to discover the first image of a tornado was captured in Kansas. After all, the state is known for its tumultuous weather both in meteorology and pop culture. In The Wizard of Oz, it was a tornado that swept poor Dorothy and Toto into a fantastical world. Kansas has seen an average of 88 tornadoes annually over the past 30 years, according to the Weather Service. However, the Sunflower State only recorded 17 in 2020, its lowest annual total in more than 40 years. The first known photograph of a tornado was taken on April 26, 1884 in Anderson County, Kansas 133 years ago. According to the Kansas Historical Society, the tornado's slow progress allowed local fruit farmer and amateur photographer A.A. Adams time to assemble his cumbersome box camera and capture this singular image. Positioned near the United Presbyterian Church in Garnett, Adams was standing just 14 miles from the cyclone,